a boy born to rule the world. Can you imagine ruling the entire world? How would you do it? Alexander the Great was a king who wanted to do just that, rule the whole world. Alexander was born in 356 BC in Greece, nearly 2,500 years ago. By the time he died, his armies controlled a massive area stretching from the Mediterranean Sea to the border of India. Some rulers are called great by their people. These rulers are loved. Alexander was one of the greatest kings and most talented commanders in history. Yet he is called great for a different reason. Alexander's early life. Alexander's parents were King Philip II and Queen Olympia. They ruled a country called Macedonia. Philip had 7 wives and many children. Philip believed that Alexander was the child of one of the Greek gods. King Philip hired the philosopher Aristotle to teach his son. For years, Aristotle taught Alexander philosophy, poetry, drama, science, and politics. During his studies, Alexander learned the story of Achilles, a famous fighter. Achilles was strong and courageous. Alexander admired Achilles and wanted to be like him. King Philip was killed by one of his own soldiers in 336 BC. Alexander became king after his father's death. Alexander convinced the other Greek cities to see him as their leader. He killed anyone else who wanted to be king. From the start, Alexander was bold. In Thebes, there was more resistance. The people rebelled and rose up against Alexander. In response, Alexander burned the city to the ground. He killed all the men and captured the women and children. After that, many people were scared of Alexander, and no one wanted to challenge his power. Life in the army. Alexander was a talented general. The army left behind by his father was strong and very well trained. King Philip had increased the number of soldiers who rode horses. He also created a group of soldiers who were engineers. They built things such as bridges and towers for his army to use. Alexander learned from his father. He was a brave leader, and he made the army even stronger. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander crossed over to Asia Minor. He wanted to accomplish his father's dream, conquering the Persian Empire. Battle by battle, he was successful. And in the places he took over, he did not try to control everything. He did not care what the people believed or how they acted. He cared about his trade routes. He cared about feeding and taking care of his soldiers. The Battle of Issus. Alexander's greatest victory was at the Battle of Issus. It was the first time he faced the Persian king Darius III. Darius had a much bigger army than Alexander, but Alexander was the better general. The armies met at the river Panaris, which is now in Turkey. When Darius realized that Alexander would win the battle, he ran away. He left his family and a lot of gold and silver behind. His army ran away too. On to Egypt. Next, Alexander made his way to Egypt. There he was welcomed. In Egypt, he designed and built the city Alexandria. Over his lifetime, Alexander named over 70 cities after himself. He even named one after his horse. In Egypt, Alexander visited an important temple at Siwa. According to some sources, the priest there called Alexander the son of God. From this point on, Alexander declared that he was the son of the god Zeus. On to Persia. In 331 BC, Alexander and Darius met again at the Battle of Gaugamela. It was a repeat of Issus. Although outnumbered, Alexander won and Darius fled again. This time, however, Alexander named himself the King of Asia. A few years later, while defeating rebels at the rock of Ariamazes, Alexander met Roxana. They were married in a traditional wedding soon afterwards. In 327 BC, Alexander invaded India, the area we now call Pakistan. Most of the cities surrendered to him without a fight. But after a difficult battle at the Hydaspes River, won by Alexander, his soldiers did not want to fight any longer. Alexander decided to go home. He sent half of his soldiers home by sea, and the other half marched home. The walk home was difficult, and many of these soldiers did not make it home. The man, the legend. Nevertheless, Alexander had achieved something amazing. He defeated the Persian Empire. This meant that Greek people moved and lived all across the region. Greek culture also spread all the way through Western Asia. In fact, the Greek culture had a powerful influence on other people. Alexander created the largest empire the world had ever seen. Alexander wanted everyone to like him or fear him. He needed to be special and to be recognized. He often had intense bad moods. He drank a lot of wine. Sometimes he was cruel or bad-mannered. From time to time, he would murder close friends or advisors. He was also ruthless to those who rose up against him. In addition, Alexander created a legend around himself. He called himself the son of Zeus. He put his own image and name everywhere: statues, cities, coins, etc. Alexander died in Babylon when he was only 32 years old. Alexander's death is a great mystery. After a night of heavy drinking, he complained of stomach pains. He then suffered from a bad illness for many days. Slowly, he got worse until he could not move. Some people say he died of a disease called malaria. Other people say he was poisoned. As he was dying, he was asked to whom the empire should pass. Apparently, he said it should pass to the strongest. At the time of his death, his wife Roxana was pregnant. She gave birth to his son, Alexander IV, a few months later. One of the world's greatest leaders. Alexander the Great's story is romantic and glorious. He was one of the most famous leaders of the ancient world. He inspired later leaders such as Julius Caesar and Napoleon. Alexander died young like his hero Achilles. Nevertheless, he has been remembered as he hoped. He achieved his goal of controlling almost the entire known world. How accurate is it to call Alexander great? Often, we call men and women great when they have a big effect on history. Some people argue that to be really great, you have to be a moral person too. Alexander certainly defeated many people, but he was also cruel. He was not kind-hearted. What do you think? Is Alexander worthy of the title great?